Hello? Good evening, everyone. My mic sounds kind of like... Hi! No, Soppy, it's not a new model. This is my normal model. I just have a little outfit on. Thought I'd get cozy with you guys. It's not time to raid yet. Hi, Mafu. Thank you for coming. I'm actually really nervous. I've never done this before, and I'm worried that I'll be super loud. But right as I started stream, or right before I started stream, my mic had entirely messed up, and none of the filters were working, so I had to reset everything right as I started stream. So if I sound awful, don't tell me, I'll cry. You can tell me after stream. But this is very long overdue, but with the move and everything, I had the inability to actually complete this, but because you all are absolutely mental and you... what's the word? You, I guess, won an ASMR stream from the subathon last October, so I'm making right on that wish for you guys, and we're gonna be reading some Edgar Allan Poe tonight. If you guys have any stories you want to hear, I'll read maybe 3 to 5, depending on how long they are. I know that I want to read The Fall of the House of Usher at some point, but it was this, or it was Alice in Wonderland, or Shakespeare, or a bunch of other things that you guys could have suggested. I went ahead and made a poll in the Discord, and y'all chose Edgar Allan Poe, because of course y'all did. Hi, Indy. I ended up removing a bunch of the channel redeems, or at least not removing them. I ended up disabling them because this is supposed to be a comfy stream. It's supposed to be like a bedtime story, and I can't have you guys playing the toothless meme dance in the middle of me trying to read about, like, the Telltale Heart or the Cask of Amontillado. So I went ahead and I disabled a few of those. Except for that one. Because... did I disable that one? Hi, Rose. Rose is the first one. Oh, thank you for the follow, Stoner Sam 420. Mwah. Mwah. Thank you for the bits, guys. Oh no, you added a hype train. Guys, we've done this before. We've done this before. You know what you're supposed to do when we get a hype train. You let it die. Because the last time we did... Gnome. Gnome. Rose. Guys, we're not... We haven't even started yet. Rose. We haven't even started the stream yet. Guys, you're breaking the stream. Guys. I can't get loud. It's supposed to be a comfy stream, but you're breaking the stream. Guys. Guys. What kind of positive affirmations? Rose, how many bits is that? How many bits is that? I can't count. 1, 2, 3, 300. Guys, we just started. Guys, we've been live for 10 minutes. Please. Guys. Why do y'all always do this? Guys, you're breaking stream. Guys. 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 What? Stop upgrading the hype train. Guys. Please. Guys. It's 9 p.m. I can't yell. But you know, if it was like lunchtime, I'd be losing my mind. Guys. God, I owe 2 of y'all positive affirmations now. I'm gonna fucking break stream, I swear. Hi, Chef. How come you're not asleep, Sam? How come you're not asleep? It's great to have you, but why are you not asleep? Sleep is good. It's in the name. Welcome, Mephistum. Thank you for the first time chat. I swear. I can't believe you guys. Y'all, every time we get a hype train, y'all try and break the records. The brain ain't braining no more? Well, I hope you enjoy the stream. I hope you enjoy some Edgar Allan Poe. Oh, fuck. I just almost tripped Edgar Allan Poe. We're doing great. I kinda punched the book. Just ignore me. What do you guys want to hear first? Because I have... While you guys are picking, I'm gonna go ahead and do... Oh my god. I don't have my tarot. Nobody gift 10 subs. I need to get my tarot. Oh no. Oh no. Hold on. I'll be right. Hold on. I promise that I am okay. The model losing her mind is not conducive to how I look IRL. Most of the time. The Raven? Alright. What kind of affirmations would you guys like? Gnome and Rose. Hi, Crusher. Is it just called the Raven? I feel like that one... Is it... Huh? What? Negative affirmations? Y'all want me to... But it says positive. How do you even do a negative affirmation? Is that like... Do y'all want me to like... What's the word? No. Degrade? And you... But what's a negative affirmation? What's an... I don't understand. That's mean. Chef, if you can find the name of that story, I will read it for you. But as of right now, I can't find it because it's not called The Raven. It's something else, I think. We have everything as far as I'm aware. We have all the normal stories that you would see in like school that you would read in school, and then you have literally everything else. The Telltale Heart is in there, yes. The Cask of the Mask of the Red Death, the Cask of Amontillado, the Gold Bug, the Black Cat. It was a poem? Oh, I'm not even looking at the poems. Oops. I didn't think you guys would want any poems. Ooh, Annabelle Lee is a good one. Chef is not bullying me. Yay, the hype train died. Thank you. Yay. I received an emote. Wait, that's so fucking cute. Oh my god, guys, it's like a Care Bear. Guys, I got a Care Bear emote. That's so cute. Guys, that is so cute. Oh my gosh. Anyway. I don't even know what the best emote is. Soppy. Guys, please keep track of y'all's stuff. I thought that you guys would do like... I don't know how much y'all spent. The Black Cat. We can read the Black Cat. Where's it at? 531. Oops, I passed it. I went to the spectacles. Where's it at? Nope, I passed it as well. I went too far. Also, if you ever read The Gold Bug, be careful. For some reason, The Gold Bug has math in it. Guys, you're... Guys, Soppy, stop. Save your money, please. Or, well, I guess... Okay, so ads are supposed to be off this stream. They should be. Please tell me if they are not off. I think I turned them off. That's why I have the little menu over here beside me. That's if you guys want anything like extra, I guess. Even though some of you already get the positive affirmations. So let me go ahead and get those out of the way so we can start reading The Black Cat, which I've actually never read before. That's something new. Never read that. Rose, are you still here? Wait, Rose is at work. Why was she here in the first place if she's at work? Anyway, Gnome, would you like your positive affirmation? Or are you gonna continue to... You can double mine and pass it to the next person? Okay, I'll just give it to Rose whenever she comes back. If she comes back. She's busy, so I'll give it to her whenever I see her again. But are you guys ready? Ow, fuck. I elbowed my chair. Also, please tell me at any point if I get too loud, okay? I don't want to make this like unbearable for... Thank you, Autolist. Okay. I'm being bullied with googly eyes. I can't believe this. Why are you guys like this? Thank you for the pats, Soppy. Shut up. Not you. I had to move my keyboard out of the way so I could actually read my book. Shut up. Everything's so loud. Shut up. Stop it. Thank you for the Hydrate Crusher. I am not a grandma. I'm not a grandma. Alright. Let's go ahead and read The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. For the most wild yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad I am not. Yet mad am I not. And very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I must unburden my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world plainly, succinctly, My immediate purpose is to place before the world plainly, succinctly, and without comment a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented little but horror. To many they will seem less terrible than Baroque's. Hereafter perhaps some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to a commonplace, some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive, in the circumstance I detail with awe, nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. Well, I hope you enjoy. Thank you for the follow, Bony Shark. Welcome, welcome. From my infancy, I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals, and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time, and never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them. This peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and in my manhood I derived it with one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished an affection for the faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly to be the trouble of explaining the nature or the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute, which goes directly to the heart of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. I married early, and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. This latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to an astonishing degree. In speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon this point, and I mention the matter at all for no better reason than that it happens just now to be remembered. Pluto. This wasn't the cat's name. This was the cat's name. Was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him and he attended me whenever I went about the house. It was in the difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, I, blush to confess, had experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew, day by day, more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change of my disposition. I not only neglected, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I had no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog, when by accident or through affection they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol, and at what length even Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. One night, returning home, much intoxicated from one of my haunts around town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him, when in his fright at my violence he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take its flight from my body, and a more fiendish malevolence, gin-nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my waistcoat a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut out one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder while I pen the damnable atrocity. When reason returned in the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse for the crime of which I had been guilty, but it was at best a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. In meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented, it is true, a frightful appearance, but he no longer suffered any pain. He went about the house as usual, but as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike on part of the creature which had once so loved me, but this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit philosophy takes no account, yet I am not more sure that my soul lives. That I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, one of indivisible primary faculties or sentiments which give direction to the character of man. Who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or a silly action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination in the teeth of our best judgment to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it to be such? This spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, and to do wrong for wrong's sakes only, that urged me to continue and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the offending brute. Oh God. One morning, in cold blood, I slipped a noose around its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree. Hung it with tears streaming from my eyes and with the bitterness and remorse of my heart. Hung it because I knew it had loved me and because I had felt it given me no remorse of offense. Hung it because I knew that in doing so I was committing a sin, a deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. On the night of the day on which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. I am above the weakness of seeking and establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity, but I am detailing a chain of facts, and wish not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. This exception was found in a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and again in which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, to which I attributed to its having been recently spread. About this wall, a dense crowd were collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with very minute and eager attention. The words strange, singular, and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if graven in bas relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an acute accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope around the animal's neck. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remember, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of fire, this garden had been immediately refilled by the crowd, by someone to whom the animal must have been cut from the tree and thrown through an open window into my chamber. This had probably been done with the view of arousing me from sleep. The falling of other walls had compressed the victim to my cruelty into the substance of freshly spread plaster, the lime of which, with the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, had then accomplished a portraiture as I saw it. Although I thus readily accounted to my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half-sentiment that seemed but was not remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal, and to look about me among the vile haunts by which I habitually frequented for another pet of the same species and of somewhat similar appearance with which to supply its place. One night, as I sat half stupefied in a den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black objects reposing its head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin or of rum which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I had been looking steadily at the top of this hogshead for some minutes, and what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him to every aspect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately rose, purred loudly, and rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I at once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim to it, knew nothing of it, had never seen it before. I continued my caresses, and when I had prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once and became immediately a great favorite with my wife. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated, but I know not how or why it was, its evident fondness for myself rather disgusting and annoyed. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature, a sense of shame, and a remembrance of my former deed of cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not, for some weeks, strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence as from the breath of a pestilence. What added, no doubt, to my hatred of the beast was a discovery, on the morning after I brought it home, that, like Pluto, it had also been derived of one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I have already said, possessed, in a high degree, that humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing trait, and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a pertinacity which would be difficult to make the reader comprehend. Whenever I sit, it would crouch beneath my chair, or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I rose to walk around, it would get between my feet and thus nearly throw me down, or fastening its long and sharp claws in my dress, clamber in this manner to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from so doing, partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at loss how otherwise to define it. I am almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this felon's cell, I am almost ashamed to own, that the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras it would be possible to conceive. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of the white hair, of which I have spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and by which for a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had, at length, assumed a rigorous distinction of outline. It was now the representation of an object I had shuddered to name, and for this, above all, I loathed and dreaded, and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It is now, I say, the image of a hideous, of a ghastly thing, of the gallows, O mournful and terrible engine of horror and of crime, of agony and of death. And now was I indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast, whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast so work out for me. For me, a man fashioned in the image of the high God, so much of sufferable woe. Alas, neither by day nor by night knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the former creature left me no moment alone, and in the latter I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear, to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight, an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent entirely upon my heart. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble realm of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates. The darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind, while, from the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of a fury to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my complaining wife, alas, was the most usual and the most patient of sufferers. One day she accompanied me upon some household errand and into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep stairs, and nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to madness. Uplifting my axe, and forgetting in my wrath the childish dredge which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal, which of course would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished, but this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith and with tattered deliberation to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house, either by day or by night, without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one period I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. At another, I resolved to dig a grave for it in the floor of the cellar. Again, I deliberated about casting it in the well in the yard, about packing it in a box, as if merchandise with the usual arrangements, and so getting a porter to take it from the house. Finally, I hit upon what I considered a far better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims. For a purpose such as this was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed, and had lately been plastered throughout with rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection, caused by a false chimney or fireplace, that had been filled up and made to resemble the red of the cellar. I had no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and wall the whole thing up as before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in position while, with little trouble, I relaid the whole structure as it originally stood. Having procured mortar, sand, and hair with every possible precaution, I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care. I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, "Here at least, then, my labor has not been in vain." My next step was to look for the beast which had been the cause of so much wretchedness, for I had, at length, firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it at that moment, there would have been no doubt of its fate, but it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger, and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe, or to imagine, the blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. I did not make its appearance during the night, and thus for one night at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept even with the burden of murder upon my soul. The second and the third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. Once again I breathed as a free man. The monster in terror had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, and these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but of course nothing was discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of the police came, very unexpectedly, into the house, and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatsoever. The officers bade me accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third and fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not in a muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom and rolled easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee at my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say if but one word by way of triumph and rendered doubly sure their assurance of my guiltiness. "Gentlemen," I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed home." In the rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. I may say, an excellently well-constructed house. These walls, are you going, gentlemen? These walls all solidly put together, and here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane, which I held in my hand upon the very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of my wife of my bosom. But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the archfiend. No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by the force from within the tomb, by a cry, at first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a waking shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony of the demons that exult in the damnation. Of my own thoughts it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For one instant the party upon the stairs remained motionless, through extremity of terror and of awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, the red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. And so be the end of the Black Cat. Are y'all still awake? Hi, Senpai. Welcome. We're reading Edgar Allan Poe tonight. I'm trying not to burp directly into the mic because I feel like that's really, really gross, and I'm trying to be really quiet and it's not working.
Honk shue, honk shue.
Honk shue. Also, the next story right after it, I don't even know what this is or what this is supposed to be, because I literally I've never read this before, but it just says diddling considered as one of the exact sciences. Isn't diddling considered like something bad nowadays? Of course, Indy. If you guys want me to read anything for you, just tell me. I really do want to find that one for Chef. Oh my god, I found it. Aw. It's one page too early. It's page 68. What the fuck? That's... Alright, after the Raven for Chef, I'll read the Telltale Heart for Soppy. Chef, you ready for the Raven? Oh, fuck my elbow. Like, actually, ow, that hurt. Okay, I found the Raven. It's on page 68. So it's not cool like I thought it would be. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, only this, and nothing more. Ah, distinctly I remember. It was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my book Circus of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This is it, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating, then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore?" This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore," merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what threat it is, what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon the bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of this countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly grim, and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is from the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast, upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul was that one word did he outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled at the stillness broken by a reply so aptly spoken, "Doubtless," said I, "what it utters is only shock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hopes that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore." But the raven still beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of the bird, and bust and door. Then upon a velvet sinking I betook myself to linking fancy into fancy, thinking about this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat in guessing, with no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining, with the lamplight gloated over. For those violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, ah, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed with an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. "Wretch," I cried, that God hath lent thee. By these angels he hath sent thee respite, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still of bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted. On this desert land enchanted, on this home by horrors haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still of bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell the soul with sorrow laden, if within his distant aiden, if shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word or sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thou soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of the demons that is dreaming, and the lamplight over him streaming throws his shadows on the floor, and my soul from out the window that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. How is that? Oh. You guys want to hear another poem? It's 2 sentences. It's called Deep in Earth. Deep in Earth by Edgar Allan Poe. Deep in earth my love is lying, and I must weep alone. I like that one. It was so short. Okay, and now I need to find a telltale heart. Let me find the... Let me see. 498. You ready, Soppy? This one is for you. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. True. Nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, and observe most healthily how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture. A pale blue eye, with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man during the whole week before I killed him, and every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all close so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously, cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And so I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight, but I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he passed the night. So you see he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Flip 50 Shades of Gale? When did it become 50 Shades of Gale? Gnome, what are you talking about? Do I sound off or something? Oh, he put his head through a door. Shush and listen. Be a good little bird. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my own sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with thick darkness, for the shutters were closed fast and through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening. And the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not the groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew that sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up in my bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first night noise, when he had turned into the bed. His fears had ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket that had made a single chirp." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with these suspicions, suppositions. But he had found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from out the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open. Wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all of a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow of my bones, but I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damned spot. And now that I have not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over acuteness of the senses, now I say there come to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldiers into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, amidst the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I restrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound could be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done, but for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber, and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha ha! When I had made an end of those labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went upon to open it with a light heart. For what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by the neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police station, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. What had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my very own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room, and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wind audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerfully, they chatted of familiar things, but ere long, I felt myself getting paled and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat, and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued, and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued, and gained definiteness, until at length, I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, and I talked more fluently, and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose above all, and continually increased. I grew louder, Louder, and Silderman chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, they heard. They suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anyway, anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision I could bear. Those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked, dissemble no more. I admit the deed, tear up the planks here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. I'm not reading too fast, am I? I have a bad habit of like talking too fast IRL, and it kind of translates whenever I read, but I've been trying really, really hard for you guys. I've been trying really hard because I want you guys to really like it. Thank you, Nightbot. Well, when everything has an exclamation point at the end, I always feel that I have to make it sound a little more oomph, you know? What else should we read? I kind of want to read one called Never Bet the Devil Your Head. I'm not exactly sure what that is supposed to mean, but I think it would be cool. Never bet the devil your head. Oh, never bet the devil your head. A tale with a moral. Did none of these have moral? Oh my god, it's some in French. Oh no. Oh no, why? Some of it's in French. I can't even speak English. Guys. Oh, it's not. Oh, that's not French, that's Spanish. Oh no. That is, that's Spanish. Oh no. Okay. Okay, let's try this. I can do this. I can do this. Okay. Okay. Never Bet the Devil Your Head. A Tale with a Moral by Edgar Allan Poe. Contal que las costumbres de un autor, please. I just insulted everybody in the Spanish-speaking community. Says Don Thomas de las Torres in the prefaces of amatory poems. Sean Puris y Costas importo muy poco que no. God damn it. Why did this one have to have a cool name but also be in Spanish? I haven't taken Spanish in years. I don't know how to read. Meaning in plain English that provided the morals of an author are pure, personally it signifies nothing what are the morals of his books. We presume that Don Thomas is now in purgatory for the assertion. It'd be a clever thing, too, in a way of poetical justice, to keep him there until his amatory poems get out of print, or are laid definitely upon the shelf through lack of readers. Every fiction should have a moral. And what is more to the purpose, to critics have discovered that every fiction has. Philip Melanchthon, some time ago, wrote a commentary upon the... what the fuck? Batrachomiomachia, and proved that the poet's object was to excite a distaste for sedition. Pierre Lessien, going a step further, shows that the intention was to recommend to young men temperance in eating and in drinking. Just so, too, Jacobus Hugo was satisfied himself by Eunice Homer meant to insinuate John Calvin by... oh, what the fuck? By Antinous Martin Luther, by the Lotophagi, Protestants in general, and by the Harpies, the Dutch. Why was that so long? Our more modern scholiasts are equally acute. Those villains demonstrate a hidden meaning in the Antediluvians, a parable in Powhatan, new views in Cock Robin, and transcendentalism in Hop on My Thumb. In short, it has been shown that no man can sit down to write without a very profound... Oh, bye, Soppy. In short, it has been shown that no man can sit down to write without a very profound design. Thus, to authors in general, much trouble is spared. A novelist, for example, need have no care of his moral. It is there, that is to say, somewhere, and the moral and the critics can take care of themselves. When the proper time arrives, that the gentleman intended, and all that he did not intend will be brought to light in the dial or the downeaster, together with all that he thought to have intended, and the rest that he clearly meant to intend, so that it will all come very straight in the end. There is no ground, therefore, for the charge brought against me by certain ignoramuses, that I have never written a moral tale, or in more precise words, a tale with a moral. They are not the critics predestined to bring me out and develop my morals. That is the secret. By and by, the North American quarterly humdrum will make them ashamed of their stupidity. In the meantime, by the way of staying execution, by way of mitigating the accusations against me, I offer the sad history appended, a history about whose obvious moral there can be no question whatever, since he who runs may read it in the large capitals which form the title of the tale. I should have credit for this arrangement, a far wiser one than that of La Fontaine and others, who reserve the impression to be conveyed until the last moment and thus sneak it in at the fag end of their fables. Okay, that actually is in French. Defuncti injuria ne efficientur was the law of the 12 tables, and Edgar Allan Poe, please, spare my idiocy. And de mortuus nil nisi bonum is an excellent injunction. Even in the dead in question be nothing but dead small beer. It is not my design, therefore, to vituperate my deceased friend, Toby Dammit. He was a sad dog, it is true, and a dog's death it was that he died, but he himself was not to blame for his vices. They grew out of a personal defect of his mother. Hello, hello, hello! Welcome! Thank you for the first time chat! We're reading Edgar Allan Poe's Never Bet the Devil Your Head. She did her best in the way of flogging him while an infant, for duties to her well-educated, well-regulated mind were always pleasures, and babies, like tough steaks or the modern Greek olive trees, are invariably the better for beating. But poor woman, she had the misfortune to be left-handed, and the child flogged left-handedly had better be left unflogged. The world revolves from right to left. It will not do to whip a baby from left to right. If each blow in the proper direction drives an evil propensity out, it follows that every thump in the opposite one knocks its quota to wickedness in. Thank you for the follow, Goose. Welcome, welcome. I was often present at Toby's chastisements, and even by the way in which he kicked, I could perceive that he was getting worse and worse every day. At last I saw through the tears in my eyes that there was no hope of Dylan at all. And one day, when he had been cuffed until he grew so black in the face that one might have mistaken him for a... Whoa, I'm not saying that. And no effect had been produced beyond that of making him wriggle himself to a fit, I could stand it no longer, and went down upon my knees forthwith, and uplifting my voice, made prophecy of his ruin. The fact is that his precocity of vice is awful. At 5 months of age, he used to get into such passions that he was unable to articulate. At 6 months, I caught him gnawing a pack of cards. At 7 months, he was in the constant habit of catching and kissing the female babies. At 8 months, he peremptorily refused to put his signature on the temperance pledge. Thus he went on increasing in iniquity month after month until at the close of the first year he not only insisted upon wearing mustaches, but had contracted a propensity for cursing and swearing and for backing his assertions by bets. Oops, I punched the mic. Through this latter, most ungentlemanly practice, the ruin which I had predicted to Toby Dammit overtook him at last. The faction had grown with his growth and strengthened with his strength, so that, when he came to be a man, he could scarcely utter a sentence without interlarding it with a proposition to gamble. Not that he actually laid wagers. No, I will do my friend the justice of saying that he would as soon have laid eggs. With him, the thing was mere formula, nothing more. His expressions on his head had no meaning attached to them whatever. They were simple, if not altogether innocent, expletives, imaginative phrases, wherewith no round off the sentence. Ouch. When he said, "I'll bet you so-so," nobody ever thought of taking him up. But still I could not help thinking it was my duty to put him down. The habit was an immoral one, and I told him. It was a vulgar one, thus I begged him to believe. It was discountenanced by society. Here I said nothing but the truth. It was a forbidden act by Congress. Here I had not the slightest intention of telling a lie. I remonstrated, but to no purpose. I demonstrated in vain. I entreated, he smiled. I implored, he laughed. I preached, he sneered. I threatened, he swore. I kicked him, he called for the police. I pulled his nose, he blew it, and offered to bet the devil his head that I will not venture to try that experiment again. Poverty was another vice, which the peculiar physical deficiency of Dammit's mother had entailed upon her son. He was detestably poor, and which was the reason, no doubt, that his expletive expressions about betting seldom took pecuniary turn. I will not be bound to say that I ever heard him use such a figure of speech as, "I'll bet you $1." It was equally, "I'll bet you what you please," or "I'll bet you what you dare," or "I'll bet you a trifle," or, more significantly still, "I'll bet the devil my head." This latter form seemed to please him best, perhaps because it involved the least risk, for Dammit had become excessively parsimonious. Had anyone taken him up, his head was small, and thus his loss would have been small too, but these are my own reflections, and I am by no means sure that I am right in attributing them to him. At all events, the phrase in question grew daily in favor, notwithstanding the gross impropriety of the man's betting his brains like banknotes. But this was the point which my friend's perversity of disposition could not permit him to comprehend. In the end, he abandoned all other forms of wager, and gave himself up to, "I'll bet the devil my head," with the pertinacity and exclusiveness of devotion that displeased not less than it surprised me. I am always displeased by circumstances for which I cannot account. Mysteries force a man to think, so injure his health. The truth is, there was something in the air with which Mr. Dammit was wont to give utterance to his offensive expression, and something in his manner of enunciation which has at first interested and afterward made me very uneasy, something of which, for want of a more definite term at present, I must be permitted to call queer, but which Mr. Coleridge would have called mystical, Mr. Kant pantheistical, Mr. Carlyle twistical, and Mr. Emerson hyperquisitistical. What the fuck? I began not to like it at all. Mr. Dammit's soul was in a perilous state. I resolved to bring all my eloquence into play to save it. I vowed to serve him at St. Patrick, and the Irish Chronicle is said to have served the toad, that is to say, awaken him to the sense of his situation. I addressed myself to the task forthwith. Once more I betook myself to remonstrance. Again, I collected my energies from the final attempt at expostulation. When I had made an end to my lecture, Mr. Dammit indulged himself in some very equivocal behavior. For some moments he remained silent, merely looking me inquisitively in the face, but presently he threw his head to one side and elevated his eyebrows to a great extent. Then he spread out the palms of his hands and shrugged up his shoulders. Then he winked with the right eye. Then he repeated the operation with the left, and then he shut them both very tight. Then he opened them both so very wide that I became seriously alarmed for the consequences. Then, applying his thumb to his nose, he thought proper to make the indescribable movement with the rest of his fingers. Finally, setting his arms akimbo, he condescended to reply. I can call to mind only the heads of his discourse. He He would be obliged to me if I could hold my tongue. He wished none of my advice. He despised all my insinuations. He was old to take care of himself. Did I still think him a baby, damn it? Did I mean to say anything against his character? Did I intend to insult him? Was I a fool? Was my maternal parent aware, in a word, of my absence from the domiciliary residence? He put this latter question to me as to the man of veracity, and he would bind himself to abide by my reply. Once more, he would demand explicitly if my mother knew that I was out. My confusion, he said, betrayed me, and he would be willing to bet the devil his head that she did not. Mr. Dammit did not pause for my rejoinder. Turning upon his heel, he left my presence with undignified precipitation. It was well for him that he did so. My feelings had been wounded. Even my anger had been aroused. For once I would have taken him upon his insulting wager. I would have won for the arch-enemy Mr. Dammit's little head, for the fact is, my mamma was very well aware of my merely temporary absence from the home. But Koda Shefa Mayedhead, heaven gives relief. As the Mussulmen say when you tread upon their toes, it was in pursuance of my duty that I had been insulted, and I bore the insult like a man. It now seemed to me, however, that I had done all that could be required of me in this case of this miserable individual, and I resolved to trouble him no longer with my counsel, but to leave him to his consciousness and himself. But although I forbore to intrude with my advice, I could not bring myself to give up his society altogether. I even went so far as to humor some of his less reprehensible propensities, and there were times when I found myself lauding his wicked jokes, as epicures do mustard, with tears in my eyes, so profoundly did it grieve me to hear his evil talk. One fine day, having strolled out together arm in arm, en route led us to the direction of the river. There was a bridge, and we resolved to cross it. It was roofed over by the way of protection from the weather. The archway, having but few windows, was thus very uncomfortably dark. As we entered the passage, the contrast between the external glare and the interior gloom struck heavily upon my spirits. Not so upon those of the unhappy Dammit, who offered to bet the devil his head that I was hipped. He seemed to be in an unusual good humor. He was excessively lively, so much so that I entertained I know not what of uneasy suspicion. It is not impossible that he was affected with the transcendentals. I am not well enough versed, however, in the diagnosis of the disease to speak with decision upon this point, and unhappily there was none of my friends on the dial present. I suggest the idea, nevertheless, because of the certain species of austere Merry Andrewism, which seemed to beset my poor friend, and caused him to make quite the tomfool of himself. Nothing would serve him but wriggling and skipping about, under, and over everything that came in his way, now shouting out, and now lisping out all manner of odd little and big words, yet preserving the gravest face in the world all the time. I really could not make up my mind whether to kick or to pity him. At length, having passed nearly across the bridge, we approached the termination of the footway, when our progress was impeded by a turnstile of some height. Through this I made my way very quietly, pushing it around as usual, but this turn would not serve the turn of Mr. Dammit. He insisted upon leaping the stile, and saying he would cut the pigeon wing over it in the air. Now this, conscientiously speaking, I did not think he could do. The best pigeon winger over all kinds of style was my friend Mr. Carlyle, and I knew he could do it. I would not believe that it could be done by Toby Dammit. I therefore told him in so many words that he was a braggadocio, and could not do what he said. For this I had reason to be sorry afterwards, for he straightway offered to bet the devil his head that he could. I was about to reply, notwithstanding my previous resolutions, with some remonstrance against his impiety, when I heard, close to my elbow, a slight cough, which sounded very much like the ejaculation I started, and looked about me in surprise. My glance at length fell into the nook of a framework of the bridge, and upon the figure of a little lame old gentleman of venerable aspect. Nothing could be more reverend than his whole appearance, for he not only had a full suit of black, but his shirt was perfectly clean, and the collar turned very neatly down over a white cravat, while his hair is parted in front like a girl's. His hands were clasped pensively together over his stomach, and his two eyes were carefully rolled up into the top of his head. Upon observing him more closely, I perceived that he wore a black silk apron over his small clothes, and this was a thing I thought very odd. Before I had time to make any remark, however, upon so singular a circumstance, he interrupted me with a second To this observation, I was not immediately prepared to reply. Hi, Helminator, welcome. The fact is, remarks of this laconic nature are nearly unanswerable. I have known a quarterly review nonplussed by the word fudge. I was not ashamed to say, further, that I turned to Mr. Dammit for assistance. Dammit, said I, what are you about? Don't you hear the gentleman says, ahem? I looked sternly at my friend while I thus addressed him, for to say the truth, I felt particularly puzzled, and when a man is particularly puzzled, he must knit his brows and look savage, or else he is pretty sure to look like a fool. Damn it, observed I, although this sounded very much like an oath, than which nothing was further from my thoughts. Damn it, I suggested. The gentleman says, ahem. I do not intend to defend my remark on the score of profundity. I did not think to profound myself, but I have noticed that the effect of our speeches is not always proportionate with our importance in their own eyes, and if I had shot Mr. D through and through with a Paxson bomb, or knocked him in the head with the poets and poetry of America, he could hardly have been more discomfited than when I addressed him with those simple words, damn it, what are you about? Don't you hear? The gentleman says, ahem. You don't say so, gasped he at length, after turning more colors than a pyrite runs up, one after the other, when chased by a man-of-war. Are you quite sure he said that? Well, at all events, I am in it for now, and might as well put a bold face upon the matter. Here goes, then. Ahem. At this, the little old gentleman seemed pleased, God only knows why. He left his station at the nook of the bridge, limped forward with a gracious air, took Dammit by the hand, and shook it cordially, looking all the while straight up in his face with an air of the most unadulterated benignity which it is possible for the mind of man to imagine. I am quite sure you will win it, damn it, he said with the frankness of smiles, but we are obliged to have a trial before you, for the sake of mere form. Ahem, replied my friend, taking his coat off with a deep sigh, tying the pocket handkerchief around his waist, and producing an uncountable alteration to his countenance by twisting up his eyes and bringing down the corner of his mouth. Ahem, and ahem, he said again after a pause, and yet another word, then ahem. Did I ever know he could say after that? Aha, thought I, without expressing myself aloud. This is quite a remarkable silence on the part of Toby Dammit, and is no doubt a consequence of his verbosity upon a previous occasion. One extreme induces another. I wonder if he's forgotten the many unanswerable questions which he propounded to me so fluently on the day when I gave him my last lecture. At all events, he is cured of the transcendentalists. Ahem, he replied Toby, just as he had been reading my thoughts and looking like a very old sheep in a reverie. The old gentleman now took him by the arm and led him more into the shade of the bridge, a few paces back from the turnstile. My good fellow, said he, I make it to the point of the conscience to allow you this much run. Wait here till I take my place by the stile, so that I may see whether you go over it handsomely and transcendentally, and don't omit any flourishes of the pigeon wing. A mere form, you know. I will say 1, 2, 3, and away. Mind you start on the word away. Here he took his position with a stile, paused a moment as if to profound reflection, then looked up, and I thought smiled very slightly, then tightened the strings of his apron, then took a long look at Dammit, and finally gave the word as agreed upon. 1, 2, 3, and away. Punctually, at the word away, my poor friend set off in a strong gallop. The stile was not very high, like Mr. Lord's, yet not very low, like that of Mr. Lord's reviewers, but upon the whole I made sure that he would clear it. And then what if he did not? Ah, that was the question. What if he did not? What right, said I, had the old gentleman to make any gentleman jump? That little old Dot and Carry one? Who is he? If he asks me to jump, I won't do it, that's flat, and I don't care who the devil he is. The bridge, as I say, was arched and covered in a very ridiculous manner, and there was a most uncomfortable echo about it all the time, an echo which I never before so particularly observed as when I uttered the 4 last words of my remark. But what I said, or what I thought, or what I heard, occupied only an instant. In less than 5 seconds from his starting, my poor Toby had taken the leap. I saw him run nimbly and spring grandly from the floor of the bridge, cutting the most awful flourishes with his legs as he went up. I saw him high in the air, pigeon-winging it to admiration just over the top of the stile, and of course I thought, an unusually singular thing, that he did not continue to go over. But the whole leap was the affair of the moment, and before I had a chance to take any profound reflections, down came Mr. Dammit on the flat of his back on the side of the stile from which he had started. In the same instant, I saw the old man limping off at the top of his speed, having caught and wrapped in his apron something that fell heavily into it from the darkness of the arch just over the turnstile. After all, this is very much astonished, but I had no leisure to think, for Mr. Dammit lay particularly still, and I concluded that his feelings had been hurt, and that he stood in need of my assistance. The truth is, he had been deprived of his head, which after a close search I could not find anywhere. I so determined to take him home and send for the homeopathists. In the meantime, a thought struck me, and I threw upon an adjacent window of the bridge when the sad truth flashed upon me at once. About 5 feet, just above the top of the turnstile, and crossing the arch of the footpath so as to constitute a brace, there extended a flat iron bar, lying with its breadth horizontally and forming one of a series that served to strengthen the structure throughout its extent. With the edge of this brace, it appeared evident that the neck of my unfortunate friend had come precisely in contact. He did not long survive his terrible loss. The homeopathists did not give him little enough physic, and what little they did give him he hesitated to take. So in the end he grew worse, and at length died, a lesson to all righteous livers. I bedewed his grave with my tears, worked a bar sinister on his family's in escutcheon, and for the general expenses of his funeral, sent him my very moderate bill to the transcendentalists. The scoundrels refused to pay it, and so I had Mr. Dammit dug up at once and sold him for dog's meat. Yo, what the fuck was that story? What the fuck? Me, calm down. Calm down, me. I just shifted in my chair. Now onto the pit and a pendulum. I've actually never read this one, so I'm excited. I was sick unto death with that long agony, and when they at length unbound me, and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sentence, the dread sense of death, was the last of distinct accentuation which reached my ears. After that, the sound of the inquisitorial voices seemed to merge in one dreamy, indeterminate hum. It conveyed to my soul the idea of revolution, perhaps from its association in fancy with the burr of a mill wheel. This only for a brief period, for presently I heard no more, yet for a while I saw, with how terrible an exaggeration, I saw the lips of the black-robed judges. They appeared to me white, whiter than the sheet upon which I traced those words, and then even to grotesqueness, then with the intensity of their expression of firmness, of immovable resolution, of stern contempt of human torture. I saw that the decrees of what to me was fate were still issuing from those lips. I saw them writhe with a deadly locution. I saw them fashion the syllables of my name, and I shuddered because no sound succeeded. I saw, too, for a few moments of delirious horror, the softness and nearly imperceptible waving of the sable draperies which enwrapped the halls of the apartment. And then my vision fell upon the 7 tall candles upon the table. At first they wore the aspects of charity and seemed white and slender angels who could save me, but then, all at once, there became the most deadly nausea over my spirit, and I felt every fiber in my frame thrill as if I had touched the wire of a galvanic battery, where the angel forms became meaningless specters with heads of flames, and I saw from there that there would be no help. And then there stole into my fancy, like a rich musical note, the thought of what sweet rest there must be in the grave. The thought came gently and stealthily, and it seemed long before it attained full appreciation, but just as my spirit came at length properly to feel and entertain it, the figures of the judges vanished, as if magically from before me. The tall candles sank into nothingness, their flames went out utterly, the blackness of darkness supervened, all sensations appeared swallowed up in a mad, rushing descent, as of the soul into Hades, then silence, and stillness, and night were the universe. I had swooned, but still will not say that all of the unconsciousness was lost. What of it there remained I will not attempt to define, or even to describe. Yet that was not it. There remained I will not attempt to define. Wait. Yet all that was... oh my god, hold on. What of it there remained I will not attempt to define, or even to describe, yet all was not lost. In the deepest slumber, no. Delirium, no. In a swoon, no. In death, no. Even in the grave, all is not lost. Else there is no immortality for man. Arousing from this most profound of slumbers, we break the gossamer web of some dream. Yet, in a second afterwards, so frail may that web have been, we remember not that we have dreamed. In the return of life from the swoon there are 2 stages. First, that of the sense of mental or spiritual. Secondly, that of the sense of physical existence. It seemed probable that if upon reaching the second stage we could recall the impressions of the first, we should find these impressions eloquent in memories of the gulf beyond. And that gulf is... what? How at least shall we distinguish in shadows from those of the tomb? But if the impressions of what I have termed the first stage or not, it will recalled, yet after long interval, do they not come unbidden, while we marvel whence they come? He who has never swooned is not he who finds strange palaces and wildly familiar faces and coals that glow. Is not he who belongs floating in midair the sad visions that the many may not view. Is not he who ponders over the perfume of some novel flower. Is not he whose brain grows bewildered with the meaning of some musical cadence which has never before arrested his attention. Amid frequent and thoughtful endeavors to remember, amid earnest struggles to regain some token of the state of seeming nothingness into which my soul had lapsed, there have been moments when I have dreamed of success. There have been very brief periods when I have conjured up remembrances which the lucid reason of a later epoch assures me could have been the reference only to that condition of seeming unconsciousness. These shadows of memory tell indistinctly of tall figures that lifted and bore me in silence, down, still down, till a hideous dizziness oppressed me at the mere idea of the interminableness of the descent. They tell also of a vague horror at my heart, on occasion of that heart's unnatural stillness. Then comes a sense of sudden motionlessness throughout all things, as if those who bore me, a ghastly train, had outrun in their descent the limits of the limitless, and paused for the wearisomeness in their toil. After this I call to mind flatness and dampness, and then all is madness, the madness of a memory which busies itself among forbidden things. Very suddenly there came back to my soul motion and sound, a tumultuous motion of the heart, and in my eyes the sound of its beating, then a pause in which all is blank. Then again sound, and motion, and touch, a tingling sensation pervading my frame, then the mere consciousness of existence, Without thought, a conditions wouldn't last long. Then very suddenly thought, and shuddering terror, an earnest endeavor to comprehend my true state. Then a strong desire to lapse into insensibility, then a rushing revival of soul, and a successful effort to move, and now a full memory of the trial, of the judges, of the sable draperies, of the sentence, of the sickness, of the swoon, then entire forgetfulness of all that followed, of all that a later day and much earnestness of endeavor have enabled me vaguely to recall. So far, I had not opened my eyes. I felt that it lay upon my back, unbound. I reached out my hand, and it fell heavily upon something damp and hard. There I suffered to remain in for many minutes, while I strove to imagine where and what I could be. I longed, yet dared not to employ my vision. I dreaded the first glance at objects around me. It was not that I feared to look upon things horrible, but that I grew aghast lest there should be nothing to see. Welcome, Muzu, welcome. At length, with a wild desperation at heart, I quickly unclosed my eyes. My worst thoughts, then, were confirmed. The blackness of eternal night encompassed me. I struggled to breathe. The intensity of the darkness seemed to oppress and stifle me. The atmosphere was intolerably close. I still lay quietly and made effort to exercise my reason. I brought to mind the inquisitorial proceedings and attempted from that point to deduce my real condition. The sentence had passed, and it appeared to me that a very long interval of time had since elapsed. Yet not for a moment did I suppose myself actually dead. Such a supposition, notwithstanding what we read in fiction, is altogether inconsistent with real existence. But where and in what state was I? The condemned to death, I knew, perished usually at the auto de fa, and one of those had been held on the very night of the day of my trial. Had I been remanded to my dungeon to await the next sacrifice, which would not take place for many months? This I at once saw could not be true. Hi, Dryad, welcome. It's nice to see you. It's okay if you can't stay. Hope you have a good night. No, you're cool. Victims had been in immediate demand. Moreover, my dungeon, as well as all the condemned cells in Toledo, had stone floors, and light was not altogether excluded. A fearful idea now suddenly drove the blood in torrents upon my heart, and for a brief period I once relapsed into insensibility. Upon recovering, I at once started to my feet, trembling convulsively in every fiber. I thrust my arms wildly above and around me in all directions. I felt nothing, yet dreaded to move a step lest I be impeded by the walls of a tomb. Perspiration burst from every pore and stood in cold big beads upon my forehead. The agony of suspense grew at length intolerable, and I consciously moved forward with my arms extended and my eyes straining from their sockets in the hope of catching some faint ray of light. I proceeded for many paces, but still all was blackness and vacancy. I breathed more freely. It seemed evidence that mine was not, at least, the most hideous of fates. And now, as I still continued to step forward onward, there came thronging upon my recollection 1,000 vague memories of the horrors of Toledo. Of the dungeons there had been the strange things narrated fables had I only deemed them, but yet strange and too ghastly to repeat, save in a whisper. Was I left to perish of starvation in the subterranean world of darkness? Or what fate, perhaps even more fearful, awaited me? That the result would be death, and a death of more customary bitterness I knew too well the character of my judges to doubt. The mode and the hour were all that occupied or distracted me. My outstretched hands at length encountered some solid obstruction. It was a wall seemingly of stone masonry, very smooth, slimy, and cold. I followed it up, stepping with all the careful distrust into which certain antique narratives had inspired me. This process, however, afforded me no means of ascertaining the dimensions of my dungeon, as I might make its circuit and return to the point whence I set out, without being aware of the fact, so perfectly uniform seemed the wall. Therefore, I sought the knife which had been in my pocket when led into the inquisitorial chamber, but it was gone. My clothes had been exchanged for a wrapper of corpse serge. I had thought of forcing the blade in some minute crevice of the masonry, so as to identify my point of departure. The difficulty, nevertheless, was but trivial, although in the disorder of my fancy, it seemed at first insuperable. I tore apart of the hem of the rope and placed a fragment at full length and at the right angles of the wall. In groping my way around the prison, I could not fail to encounter this rag upon completing the circuit, so at least I thought. But I had not counted upon the extent of the dungeon or upon my own weakness. The ground was moist and slippery. I staggered onward for some time, when I stumbled and fell. My excessive fatigue induced me to remain prostrate, and sleep soon overtook me as I lay. Upon waking and stretching forth an arm, I found myself beside a loaf and a pitcher of water. I was too exhausted to reflect upon this circumstance, but ate and drank with avidity. Shortly afterward, I resumed my tour around the prison, and with much toil came to last upon the fragment of the serge. Up to the period when I fell, I had counted 52 paces, and upon resuming my walk, I had counted 48 more, when I arrived at the rag. There were all in then 100 paces, and admitting 2 paces to the yard, I presumed the dungeon to be 50 yards in circuit. I had met, however, with many angles in the wall, and thus I could form no guess at the shape of the vault, for vault I could not help supposing it to be. I had little object, certainly no hope in these researches, but a vague curiosity prompted me to continue them. Quitting the wall, I resolved to cross the area of the enclosure. At first, I proceeded with extreme caution, for the floor, seemingly of solid material, was treacherous with slime. At length, however, I took courage and did not hesitate to step firmly, endeavoring to cross in as direct a line as possible. I had advanced some 10 or 12 paces in this manner when the remnant of a torn hem of my robe became entangled between my legs. I stepped on it and fell violently on my face. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend a somewhat startling circumstance, which yet in a few seconds afterward, and while I still lay prostrate, arrested my attention. It was this. My chin rested upon the floor of the prison, but my lips, and the upper portion of my head, although seemingly at a less elevation of the chin, touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemed bathed in a clammy vapor, and the peculiar smell of decayed fungus rose to my nostrils. I put forward my arm and shuddered to find out that I had fallen at the very brink of a circular pit, whose extent, of course, I had no means of ascertaining at the moment. Groping about the masonry just below the margin, I succeeded in dislodging a small fragment and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds I hearkened to its reverberation as it dashed against the side of the chasm in its descent. At length, there was a sullen plunge into water, succeeded by loud echoes. The same moment, there came a sound resembling the quick opening and rapid closing the door overhead, while a faint gleam of light flashed suddenly through the gloom, and as suddenly faded away. I saw clearly the doom which had been prepared for me, and congratulated myself upon the timely accident by which I had escaped. Another step before my fall, and the world would have seen me no more, and the death just avoided was of that very character which I had regarded as fabulous and frivolous in the tales respecting of the Inquisition. To the victims of this tyranny, there was the choice of death with its direct physical agonies, or death in its most hideous moral horrors. I had been reserved to the latter. By long suffering, my nerves had been unstrung until I trembled at the sound of my own voice, and had become every aspect a fitting subject for the species of torture which awaited me. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall, resolving there to perish rather than risk the terrors of the wells, of which my imagination now pictured many in various positions about the dungeon. In other conditions of mind, I might have had courage to end my misery at once by the plunge into one of these abysses, but now I was the veriest of cowards. Neither could I forget what I had read of those pits. The sudden extinction of life formed no part of its most horrible plan. Agitation of spirit kept me awake for many long hours, but at length I again slumbered. Upon arousing, I found by my side, as before, a loaf and a pitcher of water. A burning thirst consumed me, and I emptied the vessel at a draught. It must have been drugged, for scarcely I had drunk before I became irresistibly drowsy. A deep sleep fell upon me, a sleep like that of death. How long it lasted, of course, I know not, but when once again I unclosed my eyes, the objects around me were visible by a wild sulphurous luster, the origin of which I had not I could not at first determine. I was unable to see the extent and aspect of the prison. In its size, I had been greatly mistaken. The whole circuit of its walls did not exceed 25 yards. For some minutes, this fact occasioned me to the world of vain trouble. Vain indeed, for what could be of less importance under the terrible circumstances which environed one than the mere dimensions of my dungeon? But my soul took a wild interest in trifles, and I busied myself in endeavors to account for the error I had committed in my measurement. The truth, at length, flashed upon me. In my first attempt at exploration, I had counted 52 paces upon the period when I fell. I must have been within a pace or two of the fragment of surge. In fact, I had nearly performed the circuit of the vault. I then slept, and upon waking up, I must have returned upon my steps, thus supposing the circuit nearly double what it actually was. My confusion of mind prevented me from observing that I began my tour with the wall to the left, and ended with the wall to the right. I have been deceived, too, in respect to the shape of the enclosure. In feeling my way, I found many angles, and thus deduced an idea of great irregularity. So potent is the effect of total darkness upon one arousing from lethargy or sleep. The angles were simply those of a few slight depressions, or niches, at odd intervals. The general shape of the prison was square, which I had taken from masonry seemed now to be iron or some other metal in huge plates, whose sutures or joints occasioned the depression. The entire surface of this metallic enclosure was rudely daubed in all these hideous and repulsive devices to which the charnel superstition of the monks had given rise. The figures of fiends and aspects of menace with skeleton forms and other more really fearful images overspread and disfigured the walls. I observed that the outlines of these monstrosities were sufficiently distinct, but that the colors seemed faded and blurred, as if from the effects of a damp atmosphere. I now noticed the floor, too, which was of stone, and in the center yawned the circular pit from whose jaws I had escaped, but it was only one in the dungeon. All this I saw indistinctly, and by much effort, for my personal condition had been greatly changed during slumber. I now lay upon my back and at full length on a species of low framework of wood. To this I was securely bound by a long strap resembling a surcingle. It passed by many convolutions about my limbs and body, leaving at liberty only my head and my left arm to such extent that I could, by dint of much exertion, supply myself with food from an earthen dish which lay by my side on the floor. I saw to my horror that the pitcher had been removed. I say to my horror, for I was consumed with intolerable thirst. This thirst, it appeared to be the design of my persecutors to stimulate, for the food in the dish was meat pungently seasoned. Looking upward, I surveyed the ceiling of my prison. It was some 30 or 40 feet overhead and constructed much of the side walls. In one of its panels, a very singular figure riveted my whole attention. It was the painted figure of Time, as he is commonly represented, save that in lieu of a scythe, he held what, at a casual glance, I supposed to be the pictured image of a huge pendulum, such as we see on antique clocks. There was something, however, in the appearance of this machine which caused me to regard it more attentively, while I gazed directly upward at it, for its position was immediately over my own. I fancied that I saw it in motion. In an instant afterward, the fancy was confirmed. Its sweep was brief, and of course slow. I watched it for some time, somewhat in fear, but more in wonder. Wearied at length with observing its dull movement, I turned my eyes upon other objects in the cell. A slight noise attracted my notice, and looking to the floor, I saw several enormous rats traversing it. They had issued from the well, which lay just within view to my right. Even then, while I gazed, they came up in troops, hurriedly, with ravenous eyes, alluring by the scent of the meat. Not the sweat, the scent of the meat. From this, it required much effort and attention to scare them away. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, for I could take but imperfect note of time, before I again cast my eyes upward. What I then saw confounded and amazed me. The sweep of the pendulum had increased in extent by nearly a yard. As a natural consequence, its velocity was also much greater. But what mainly disturbed me was the idea that it had perceptibly descended. I now observed, with what horror it is needless to say, that its nether extremity was formed of a crescent of glittering steel about a foot in length from horn to horn, the horns upward, and the under edge evidently as keen as that of a razor. Like a razor also, it seemed massy and heavy, tapering from the edge into a solid and broad structure above. It was appended to a weighty rod of brass, and the whole hissed as it swung through the air. I could no longer doubt the doom prepared for me by monkish ingenuity and torture. My cognizance of the pit had become known to the inquisitorial agents, the pit, whose horror had been destined to be so bold with Hewson as myself, the pit, typical of hell and regarded by humor of the ultimate thule of all their punishments. The plunge into this pit I had avoided by the merest of accidents. I knew that surprise or entrapment into torment formed an important portion of all grotesquerie in these dungeon deaths. Having failed to fall, it was no part of the demon plan to hurl me into the abyss, and thus, therefore, with being no alternative, a different and a milder destruction awaited me. Milder. I half smiled in my agony as I thought of such application of such a term. What boots it is to tell of the long, long hours of horror, more than mortal, during which I counted the rushing oscillations of the steel, inch by inch, line by line, with a descent only appreciable at intervals that seemed ages. Down, and still down it came. Days passed. It might have been that many days passed, ere it swept so closely over me as to fan me with its acrid breath. The odor of its sharp steel forced itself into my nostrils. I prayed, I wearied heaven with my prayer for its more speedy descent. I grew frantically mad and struggled to force myself upward against the sweep of the fearful scimitar. And then I suddenly felt calm, and lay smiling at the glittering death, as a child at some rare bauble. There was another interval of utter insensibility. It was brief, for upon again lapsing into life, there had been no perceptible descent in the pendulum. But it might have been long, for I knew that there were demons who took note of my swoon, and who could have arrested the vibration at pleasure. Upon my recovery, too, I felt very, inexpressibly sick and weak, as if through long inanition. Even amid the agonies of that period, the human nature craved food. With painful effort, I outstretched my left arm as far as my bounds permitted and took possession of the small remnant of what had been spared me by the rats. As I put the portion of it within my lips, then rushed to my mind a half-formed thought of joy, of hope. Yet what business had I with hope? It was, as I say, a half-formed thought. Man has many such, which are never completed. I felt that it was a joy of hope, but also that it had been perished in its information. In gain, I struggled to perfect, to regain it. Long suffering had nearly annihilated all my ordinary powers of mind. I was an imbecile, an idiot. The vibration of the pendulum was at right angles to my length. I saw that the crescent was designed to cross the region of my heart. It would lay the surge of my robe and return the repetition. It would return and repeat its operations again and again, notwithstanding its terrifyingly wide sweep, some 30 feet or more, and the hissing vigor of its descent, sufficient to sunder these very walls of iron. Still the fraying of my robe would be all that, for several minutes, it could accomplish. And at this thought I paused. I dared not go farther than this reflection. I dwelt upon it with pertinacity of attention, as if in so dwelling I could arrest here the scent of the steel. I forced myself to ponder upon the sound of the crescent as it should pass across the garment, upon the peculiar thrilling sensation which the friction of cloth produces on the nerve. I pondered upon this frivolity until my teeth were on edge. Down steadily it crept. I took a frenzied pleasure in contrasting its downward with its lateral velocity, to the right, to the left, far and wide, with the streak of the damned spirit, to my heart with the stealthy pace of the tiger. I alternatively laughed and howled as one or the other grew predominant. Down, certainly relentlessly down, it vibrated within 3 inches of my bosom. I struggled violently, furiously to free my left arm. This was free only from the elbow to the hand. I could reach the latter from the platter beside me to my mouth with great effort, but no farther. Could I have broken the fastings above the elbow? I would have seized and attempted to arrest the pendulum. I might as well have attempted to arrest an avalanche. Down, still unceasingly, still inevitably down. I gasped and struggled at each vibration. I shrunk convulsively at its every sweep. My eyes followed it outward or upward whirls with eagerness of the most unmeaning despair. They closed themselves spasmodically at the descent. Although death would have been a relief, oh, how unspeakable! Still I quivered, in every nerve to think how slight unsinking of the machinery would precipitate that keen, glistening axe upon my bosom. It was hope that prompted that nerve to quiet, the frame to shrink. It was hope. The hope that triumphs on the rack, that whispers to the death condemned even in the dungeons of the Inquisition. I saw that some 10 or 12 vibrations would bring the steel in actual contact with my robe, and with this observation there suddenly came over my spirit all the keen, collected calmness of despair. For the first time during many hours, or perhaps days, I thought, it now occurred to me that the bandage, or Sir Kingle, which enveloped me, was unique. I was tied by no separate cord. The first stroke of the razor-like crescent thwarted any portion of the band, was so detached it at that would be unwound from my person by means of my left hand. But how fearful, in that case, the proximity of the steel. The result of the slightest struggle, how deadly. Was it likely, moreover, that the means of the torture had not been foreseen and provided for this possibility? Was it probable but the bandage covered across my bosom in the track of the pendulum? Dreading to find my fate, and as it seemed, my last hope frustrated, I so far elevated my head as to attain a distinct view of my breast. The Sir Kingle, I don't know how to actually pronounce that. The Sir Kingle enveloped my limbs and body close in all directions, save in the path of the destroying crescent. Scarcely I had dropped my head back into its original position when there flashed upon my mind what I cannot better describe that as an uninformed half of that idea of deliverance to which I had previously alluded, and of which a moiety only floated indeterminably through my brain when I raised food to my burning lips. The whole thought was now present, feeble, scarcely sane, scarcely definite, but still entire. I proceeded at once with the nervous energy of despair to attempt its execution. For many hours, the immediate vicinity of the low framework upon which I lay had been literally swarming with rats. They were wild, bold, ravenous, their red eyes glaring upon me as if they waited, but for motionless, on my part to make me their prey. To what food, I thought, have they been accustomed in the well? They devoured, in spite of all my efforts to prevent them, all but a small remnant of the contents of the dish. I had fallen into a habitual seesaw, or wave of the hand about the platter, and at length the unconscious uniformity of the movement derived it to have effect. In their ferocity, the vermin had frequently fastened their sharp fangs to my fingers. With the particles of the oily and spicy viand which now remained, I thoroughly rubbed the bandage wherever I could reach it, then raising my hand from the floor, I lay breathlessly still. At first, the ravenous animals were startled and terrified at the change. At the cessation of movement, they shrank alarmedly back. Many sought the well, but this was only for a moment. I had not counted in vain upon their ferocity. Observing that I remained without motion, one or two of the boldest leaped upon the framework and smelt at the surgical. This seemed the signal of the general rush. Forth from the well they hurried in fresh troops. They clung to the wood, they overran it, and leaped in hundreds upon my person. The measured movement of the pendulum disturbed them not at all. Avoiding its stroke, they busied themselves with the anointed bandage. They pressed, they swarmed upon me in ever-accumulating heaps. They writhed upon my throat. Their cold lips sought my own. I was half stifled by their thronging press, disgusted for which the world has no name, swelled my bosom and chilled for very heavy clamminess my heart. Yet 1 minute, and I felt that the struggle would be over. Plainly, I perceived the loosening of the bandage. I knew that in more than one place it must be already severed. With more than human resolution, I lay still. Nor had I erred in my calculations, nor had I endured in vain. I at length felt that I was free. The surgical hung in ribbons around my body, but the stroke of the pendulum already pressed upon my bosom. It had divided the serge of the robe, it had cut through the linen beneath. Twice again it swung, and a sharp sense of pain shot through every nerve. But the moment of escape had arrived. At the wave of my hand, my deliveries hurried tumultuously away. With a steady movement, cautious, sidelong, shrinking, and slow, I slid from the base of the bandage and beyond the reach of the scimitar. For a moment, at least, I was free. Free, and in the grasp of the Inquisition. I had scarcely slept from my wooden bed of horror upon the stone floor of the prison when the motion of the hellish machine ceased, and I beheld it drawn up, by some invisible force, through the ceiling. This was a lesson which I took desperately to heart. My every motion was undoubtedly watched. Free! I had but escaped death in one form of agony, to be delivered upon worse than death in some other. With that thought, I had rolled my eyes nervously around on the barriers of iron that hemmed me in. Something unusual, some change which at first I could not appreciate distinctly. It was obvious, had taken place in the apartment. For many minutes, the dreamy and trembling abstraction, I busied myself in vain, unconnected conjecture. During this period, I became aware for the first time of the origin of the sulphurous light which illuminated the cell. It proceeded from a fissure about half an inch in width, extending entirely around the prison at the base of the walls, which thus appeared, and were completely separated from the floor. I endeavored, but of course in vain, to look through the aperture. As I arose from the attempt, the mystery of the alteration of the chamber broke at once upon my understanding. I had observed that, although the outlines of the figures upon the wall were sufficiently distinct that the colors seemed blurred and indefinite, these colors had now assured, and were momentarily assuming, a startling and more intense brilliancy that gave to the spectral and fiendish portraitures an aspect that might have thrilled even firmer nerves than my own. Demon eyes, of a wild and ghastly vivacity, glared down upon me in 1,000 directions, where none had been visible before, and gleamed with the lurid luster of a fire that I could not imagine, or force my imagination to regard as unreal. Unreal! Even while I breathed, there came to my nostrils the breath of the vapor of heated iron. A suffocating odor pervaded the prison. A deep glow settled each moment in the eyes that glared at my agonies. A richer tint of crimson diffused itself over the pictures. Horrors of blood. I panted, I gasped for breath. There could be no doubt of the design of my tormentors. Oh, most unrelenting, oh, most demoniac of man. I shrank from the glowing metal to the center of the cell. Amid the thought of the fiery destruction that impeded, the idea of the coolness of the well came over my soul like balm. I rushed to its deadly brink. I threw my straining vision below. The glare from the unkindled room illuminated its inmost recesses. Yet for a moment did my spirit refuse to comprehend the meaning of what I saw. At length it wrestled its way into my soul. It burned itself upon my shuddering vision. Oh, for a voice to speak! Oh, horror, any but this! With a shriek, I rushed from the margin and buried my face in my hands, weeping bitterly. The heat rapidly increased, and once again I looked up, shuddering it with a bit of the ague. There had been a second change in the cell, and now the change was obviously in the form. As before, it was in vain that I at first endeavored to appreciate or understand what was taking place. But not long was I left in doubt. The inquisitorial vengeance had been hurried by my own twofold escape, and there was to be no more dallying with the King of Terrors. The room had been square. I saw that 2 of its iron angles were now acute, 2 consequently obtuse. The fearful difference between quickly increased with a low rumbling or moaning sound. In an instant, the apartment had shifted its form to that of a lozenge. But the alteration stopped not here. I neither hoped nor desired it to stop. I could have clasped the red walls to my bosom as a garment of eternal peace. Death, I said, any death but that of the pit. Fool, might I not have known that into the pit it was the object of the burning iron to urge me? Could I resist its glow? Or, if even that, could it withstand its pressure? And now, flatter and flatter grew the lozenge, with a rapidity that left me no time for contemplation. Its center, and of course its greatest width, came upon over the yawning gulf. I shrank back, but the closing walls pressed me resistantly onward. At length, for my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold on the firm floor of the prison. I struggled no more, but the agony of my soul found vent in one loud, long, and final scream of despair. I felt that I tottered upon the brink. I averted my eyes. There was a discordant hum of human voices. There was a loud blast of as many trumpets. There was a huge grating as of 1,000 thunders. The fiery walls rushed back. An outstretched arm caught my own as I fell, fainting into the abyss. It was that of General Lasalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hands of its enemies. Are y'all still awake? Alright, we're on to our final story before I go ahead and call it a night. My throat's starting to hurt, so I'm gonna go ahead and end it on my favorite Edgar Allan Poe story for you guys. I punched my mic again, ignore that, I'm sorry. The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. During the whole of a dull, dark, and soundless day in the autumn of the year, when the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, I had been passing alone on horseback through a singularly dreary tract of country, and at length found myself, as the shades of the evening drew on, within view of the melancholy house of Usher. I know not how it was, but with the first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit. I say insufferable, for the fear was unrelieved by any of that half pleasurable, because poetic, sentiment with which the mind usually receives even the sternest natural images of the desolate or terrible. I looked upon the scene before me, upon the mere house and the simple landscape features of the domain, upon the bleak walls, upon the vacant eye-like windows, upon a few rank sedges, and upon a few white trunks of decayed trees, with an utter depression of soul which I compared to no earthly sensation more properly than that to the after-dream of the reveler upon opium. The bitter lapse into everyday life, the hideous dropping off of the veil. There was an iciness, a sinking, a sickening to the heart, an unredeemed dreariness of thought which no goading of the imagination could torture into aught of the sublime. What was it, I paused to think? What was it that so unnerved me in the contemplation of the House of Usher. It was a mystery, all insoluble, nor could I grapple with the shadowy fancies that crowded upon me as I pondered. I was forced to fall back upon the unsatisfactory conclusion that while beyond doubt there are combinations of very simple natural objects which have the power of thus affecting us, still the analysis of this power lies among considerations beyond our depth. It was possible, I reflected, that a mere different arrangement of its particulars of this scene, of the details of a picture, would be sufficient to modify or perhaps to annihilate its capacity for sorrowful impression. And acting upon this idea, I reined my horse to the precipitous brink of a black and lurid tarn that lay in unruffled luster by the dwelling, and gazed down, but with a shudder even more thrilling than before, upon the remodeled and inverted images of the grayish sedge, and the ghastly tree stems in the vacant and eye-like windows. Nevertheless, in this mansion of gloom I now proposed to myself a sojourn of some weeks. Its proprietor, Roderick Usher, had been one of my boon companions in boyhood, but many years had passed since our last meeting. A letter, however, had lately reached me in a distant part of the country, a letter from him, which, in its wildly importunate nature, had admitted to no other than a personal reply. The MS gave evidence of nervous agitation. The Mrs. gave evidence of nervous agitation. The writer spoke of acute bodily illness, of a mental disorder which oppressed him, and of an earnest desire to see me as his best, and indeed his only personal friend, with the view of attempting, by the cheerfulness of my society, some alleviation of his malady. It was the manner in which all this and much more was said. It was the apparent heart that went in his request, which allowed me no room for hesitation, and I accordingly obeyed forthwith that I still considered a very singular summons. Although, as boys, we had been even intimate associates, yet I really knew little of my friend. His reserve had been always excessive and habitual. I was aware, however, that his very ancient family had been noted, time out of mind, for a peculiar sensibility of temperament, displaying itself through long ages in many works of exalted art, and manifested of late in repeated deeds of munificent yet unobtrusive charity, as well as in a passionate devotion of the intricacies, perhaps even more than that of the unorthodox and easily recognizable beauties of musical science. I had learned, too, the very remarkable fact that the stem of the Usher race, all time honored as it was, had put forth at no period an enduring branch. In other words, the entire family lay in the direct line of descent, and had always, with very trifling and very temporary variation, so lain. It was this deficiency I considered, while running over in thought the perfect keeping of the character of the premises, that the accredited character of the people, and while speculating upon the possible influence which the one, in the long lapse of centuries, might have exercised upon the other, it was this deficiency, perhaps, of collateral issue, and the consequent undeviating transmission from sire to son of the patrimony with the name, which had at length so identified the two as to merge the original title of the estate in the quaint and unequivocal appellation of the House of Usher, an appellation which seemed to include the minds of the peasantry who used it, both the family and the family mansion. Oh my god, that was such a long sentence. I have said that the sole effect of my somewhat childish experiment, that of looking down within the tarn, had been to deepen my first singular impression. There can be no doubt that the consequences of the rapid increase of my superstition, for why should I not so term it, served merely to accelerate the increase itself. Such I have known long, in the paradoxical law of all sentiments having terror as a basis. And it might have been for this reason only that, when I was again uplifted my eyes to the house itself, for its image in the pool, there grew in my mind a strange fancy, a fancy so ridiculous, indeed, that I but mention it to show the vivid force of the sensations which oppressed me. I so worked upon my imagination as really to believe that about the whole mansion and domain there hung an atmosphere peculiar to themselves and their immediate vicinity. An atmosphere which had no affinity with the air of heaven, and which had been wreaked upon from the decaying trees and the gray wall and the silent tarn, a pestilent and mystic vapor, dull, sluggish, faintly discernible, and leaden-hued. Shaking off from my spirit what must have been a dream, I scanned more narrowly the real aspect of the building. Its principal feature seemed to be that of an excessive antiquity. The discoloration of ages had been great. Minute fungi overspread the whole exterior, hanging in a fine tangled web work from the eaves, yet all this was apart from any extraordinary dilapidation. No portion of the masonry had fallen, and there appeared to be the wild inconsistency between its still perfect adaptation of parts and the crumbling condition of the individual stones. In this there was much that reminded me of the suspicious totality of old woodwork which had rotted for long years in some neglected vault, with no disturbance from the breath of the external air. Beyond this indication of extensive decay, however, the fabric gave little token of instability. Perhaps the eye of the scrutinizing observer might have discovered a barely perceptible fissure which, extending from the roof of the building in front, made its way down the wall in a zigzag direction, until it became lost in the sullen waters of the tarn. Noticing these things, I rode over a very short causeway to the house. A servant in waiting took my horse, and I entered the Gothic archway to the hall. A valet, of stealthy step, thence conducted me in silence through many dark and intricate passages. In my progress to the studio of his master, much that I encountered on the way contributed, I know not how, to heighten the vague sentiments of which I had already spoken. While the objects around me, while the carvings of the ceiling, the somber tapestried walls, the ebon blackness of the floors, and the phantasmagoric armorial trophies which rattled as I stood, were but matters to which, or to such as which, had been accustomed from my infancy. While I hesitated not to acknowledge how familiar was all this, I still wondered to find how unfamiliar were the fancies which ordinary images were stirring up. On one of the staircases I met the physician of the family. His countenance, I thought, wore a mingled expression of low cunning and perplexity. He accosted me with the trepidation and passed on. The valet now threw open a door and ushered me into the presence of his master. The room in which I found myself was very large and lofty. The windows were long, narrow, and pointed, and as so vast a distance from the black oaken floor as to be altogether inaccessible from within. Feeble gleams of encrimsoned light made their way through the trestled panes and served to render sufficiently distinct the more prominent objects around. The eye, however, struggled in vain to reach the remoter angles of the chamber or to recesses of the vaulted and fretted ceiling. Dark draperies hung upon the wall. The general furniture was profuse, comfortless, antique, and tattered. Many books and musical instruments lay scattered about, but failed to give any vivacity to the scene. I felt that I breathed an atmosphere of sorrow. An air of stern, deep, irredeemable gloom hung over and pervaded all. Upon my entrance, the usher rose from a sofa on which he had been lying at full length and greeted me with a vivacious warmth which had much in it, I at first thought, of an overdone cordiality, and of the constrained effort of a new man of the world. A glance, however, at his countenance convinced me of his perfect sincerity. We sat down, and for some moments, while he spoke not, I gazed upon him with a feeling half of pity, half of awe. Surely man had never before so terribly altered in so brief a period as had Roderick Usher. It was with difficulty that I could bring myself to admit the identity of the one being before me was the companion of my early boyhood. Yet the character of his face had been all times remarkable. A cadaverous of complexion, an eye large, liquid, and luminous beyond comparison, lips somewhat thin and very pallid, but of a surprisingly beautiful curve, a nose of a delicate Hebrew model, and with a breadth of a nostril unusual in similar formations. A finely molded chin, speaking in its want of prominence, of a want of moral energy, hair of a more than web-like softness and tenuity. These features, with an inordinate expansion above the regions of the temple, made up altogether a countenance not easily to be forgotten. And now in the mere exaggeration of the prevailing characters of these features, and of the expression they were wont to convey, lay so large a change that I doubted to whom I spoke. The now ghastly pallor of the skin, and now miraculous luster of the eyes, above all things startled and even awed me. The silken hair, too, had been suffered to grow all unheeded, and as, in its wild gossamer texture, it floated rather than fell about the face. I could not, even with effort, connect its arabesque expression with any idea of simple humanity. In the manner of my friend, I was once struck with an incoherence and inconsistency, and I soon found this to arise from a series of feeble and futile struggles to overcome an habitual trepidancy, an excessive nervous agitation. For something of this nature I had indeed been prepared, no less by his letter than by reminiscence of certain boyish traits, and by conclusion deduced from his peculiar physical conformation and temperament. His actions was alternatively vivacious and sullen. His voice varied rapidly from the tremendous indecision when an animal spirit seemed utterly in abeyance, to that species of energetic concision, that abrupt, weighty, unhurried, and hollow-sounding enunciation, that leaden, self-balanced, and perfectly modulated guttural utterance, which may be observed in the lost drunkard and the irreclaimable eater of opium. During the periods of his most intense excitement, it was thus that he spoke of the object of his visit, of my visit, of his earnest desire to see me, and of the solace he expected me to afford him. He entered at some length into what he conceived to be the nature of his malady. It was, he said, a constitutional and a family evil, and one for which he despaired to find a remedy. A mere nervous affection, he immediately added, for which undoubtedly soon will pass off. It displayed itself in a host of unnatural sensations. Some of these, as he detailed them, interested and bewildered me, although perhaps the terms and the general manner of the narration had their weight. He suffered much from a morbid acuteness of the senses. The more insipid food was alone endurable. He could only wear garments of certain texture. The odors of all flowers were oppressive. His eyes were tortured by even a faint light, and there were but peculiar sounds, and these from stringed instruments, to which did not inspire him with horror. To an anomalous species of terror, I found him bound and slave. I shall perish, said he. I must perish in this deplorable folly. Thus and not otherwise shall I be lost. I dread the events of the future, not in themselves, but in their results. I shudder at the thought of any, even the most trivial incident, which may operate upon this intolerable agitation of soul. I have indeed no abhorrence to danger, except in its absolute effect. In terror, in this unnerved, in this pitiable condition, I feel that the period will sooner or later arrive when I must abandon life and reason together, in some struggle in the grim phantasm, fear. I learned, moreover, at intervals and through broken and equivocal hints, another singular feature of his mental condition. He was enchained by certain superstitious impressions in regards to the dwelling which he tenanted, and whence, for many years, he had never ventured forth in regard to any influence whose superstitious force was conveyed in terms too shadowy here to be rested. An influence which had some peculiarities in the mere form and substance of his family mansion, had by dint of long sufferance he had obtained over his spirit, an effect which the physique of the grey walls and turrets, and of the dim tarn into which they all looked down, had at length brought upon the morale of his existence. He admitted, however, although with hesitation, that much of the peculiar gloom which thus afflicted him could be traced to a more natural and far more palpable origin, to the severe and long-continued illness, indeed to the evidently approaching dissolution of a tenderly beloved sister, his sole companion for long years, his last and only relative on earth. Her decease, he said, with a bitterness which I can never forget, would leave him the hopeless and the frail, the last of the ancient race of the Ushers. While he spoke, the Lady Madeline, for so she was called, passed slowly through a remote portion of the apartment, and without having noticed my presence, disappeared. I regarded her with an utter astonishment not unmingled with dread, and yet I found it impossible to account for such feelings. A sensation of stupor oppressed me as my eyes followed her repeating steps. When a door at length closed upon her, my glance sought instinctively and eagerly the countenance of the brother, but he had buried his face in his hands, and I could only perceive that a far more than ordinary wanness had overspread the emaciated fingers through which trickled many passionate tears. The disease of the Lady Madeline had long baffled the skill of her physicians. A settled apathy, a gradual wasting away of the person, and frequent although transient affections of the partially cataleptical character were the unusual diagnosis. Hitherto she had steadily borne upon the pressure of her malady. It had not betaken herself finally to bed. But on the closing in of the evening of my arrival at the house, she succumbed, as her brother told me at night, with inexpressible agitation, to the prostrating power of the destroyer, and I learned of the glimpse I had obtained of her person would thus probably be the last I should obtain. That the lady, at least while living, would be seen by me no more. For several days ensuing, her name was unmentioned by either Usher or myself, and during this period I was busied in earnest endeavors to alleviate the melancholy of my friend. We painted and read together, or I listened, as if in a dream, to the wild improvisations of a speaking guitar. And thus, as a closer and still closer intimacy admitted me more unreservedly into the recesses of his spirit, the more bitterly did I perceive the futility of all attempted at cheering a mind from which darkness, as if an inherent positive quality, poured forth upon all objects of the moral and physical universe in one unceasing radiation of gloom. I shall ever bear about me a memory of the many solemn hours I thus spent alone with the master of the house of Usher. Yet I shall fail in any attempt to convey an idea of the exact character of the studies, or of the occupations, in which he involved me, or led me the way. An excited and highly distempered ideality threw a sulphurous luster over all. His long improvised dirges will ring forever in my ears. Among other things, I hold painfully in mind a certain singular perversion and amplification of the wild air of the last waltz of von Weber, from the paintings over which his elaborate fancy brooded, and which grew touch by touch into vagueness, at which I shuddered the more thrillingly, because I shuddered knowing not why. From these paintings, vivid as their images now are before me, I would in vain endeavor to educe more than a small portion which should lie within the compass of merely written words. By the utter simplicity, by the nakedness of the designs, he arrested and overawed attention. If the mortal painted an idea, what that mortal was Roderick Usher. For me, at least, in the circumstances then surrounding me, there arose one of the pure abstractions which the hypochondriac contrived to throw upon his canvas. An intensity of intolerable awe, no shadow of which I ever felt yet in the contemplation of the certainly growing yet too concrete reveries of Fuseli. One of the phantasmagoric conceptions of my friend, partaking not so rigidly of the spirit of abstraction, may be shadowed forth, although feebly, in words. A small picture presented the interior of an immensely long and rectangular vault or tunnel, with low walls, smooth, white, and without interruption or device. Certain accessory points of the design served well to convey that the idea that this excavation lay at an exceeding depth below the surface of the earth. No outlet was observed in any portion of its vast extent, and no torch or any artificial source of light was discernible, yet a flood of intense rays rolled throughout and bathed the whole in ghastly and inappropriate splendor. I have just spoken of that morbid condition, the auditory nerve, which rendered all music intolerable to the sufferer, with the exception of certain effects of stringed instruments. It was perhaps the narrow limits to which he thus confined himself upon the guitar, which gave birth, in great measure, to the fantastic character of his performances. But the fervid facility of his impromptu could not be so accounted for. They must have been and were in the notes as well as in the words of his wild fantasies, for he not unfrequently accompanied himself with rhymed verbal improvisations. The result of that intense mental collectedness and concentration to which I have previously alluded as observable only in particular moments of the highest artificial excitement. The words of one of these rhapsodies I have easily remembered. I was perhaps the more forcibly impressed with it as he gave it, because in the under or mystic current of its meaning, I fancy that I perceived, and for the first time, a full consciousness on the part of Usher of the tottering of his lofty reason upon her throne. The verses, which were entitled The Haunted Palace, ran very neatly, if not accurately, thus. In the greenness of our valleys, by our good angels tenanted, once a fair and stately palace, radiant palace, reared its head. In the monarch thought's dominion it stood there. Never seraph spread opinion over fabric half so fair. Banners yellow, glorious, golden, on its roof did float and flow. All this, was in the olden time long ago. And every gentle air that dallied in that sweet day, along the ramparts plumed and pallid, a winged odor went away. Wanderers in that happy valley, through two luminous windows saw, spirits moving musically to a lute's well-tuned law. Round about a throne, where sitting Porphyrogeny, in state his glory well befitting the ruler of the realm was seen. And all with pearl and ruby glowing was the fair palace door, through which came flowing, 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 and sparkling evermore, a troop of echoes, whose sweet duty was but to sing, in voices of surpassing beauty, the wit and wisdom of their king. But evil things in robes of sorrow assailed the monarch's high estate. Ah, let us mourn, for never morrow shall dawn upon him desolate. And round about his home the glory that blushed and bloomed is but a dim remembered story of the old time entombed. And travelers now within that valley, through the red-litten windows, see vast forms that move fantastically to a discordant melody, while like a rapid ghastly river through the pale door a hideous throng rush out forever and laugh, but smile no more. I well remember the suggestions arising from this ballad led us into the train of thought wherein they became manifest in opinion of Usher's, which I mention not so much on account of its novelty, from other men have thought thus, as on the account of the pertinacity to which he maintained it. This opinion, in its general form, was that of a sentience of all vegetable things, but in his disordered fancy, the idea had assumed a more daring character and trespassed upon certain conditions upon the kingdom of inorganization. I lack words to express the full extent, or the earnest abandon of his persuasion. The belief, however, was connected to the... Where did it go? Was connected, as I was previously hinted, with the great stones of the home of his forefathers. The conditions of the sentience had been there, he imagined, fulfilled in the method of collocation of these stones, in order of their arrangement, as well as in that of many fungi which had overspread them, and of the decayed trees which stood around. Above all, in the... Hi, welcome! Welcome to the aviary. Above all, in the long, undisturbed endurance of this arrangement, and in its reduplication in the still waters of the tarn, its evidence, the evidence of the sentience, was to be seen, he said, and I here started as he spoke, in the gradual yet certain condensation of an atmosphere of their own about the waters and the walls. The result was discoverable, he added, in that silent yet importunate and terrible influence which for centuries had molded the destinies of his family, and which made him what I now saw him, what he was. Such opinions need no comment, and I will make none. Our books, the books which for years had formed no small portion of the mental existence of the invalid, were, as might be supposed, in strict keeping with this character of phantasm. We pored together over such works as the Vivert et Chartreuse of Gresset, the Belphegor of Machiavelli, the Heaven and Hell of Swedenborg, the Subterranean Voyage of Nicholas Klim by Holdberg, the Chiromancy of Robert Flood, of Jean de Indigine, and of de la Chambre, the Journey into the Blue Distance of Tieck, the City of the Son of Campanella. One favorite volume was a small octavo edition of the Directorium Inquisitorium by the Dominican Aymeric de Giron, which were the passages in pompous mela about the old African satyrs and Agapans, over which Usher would sit dreaming for hours. His chief delight, however, was found in the perusal of the exceedingly rare and curious book in Quarto Gothic, the Manual of a Forgotten Church, the Vigilia Mortuorium Secundum Coram, other Latin words. Oh my god, there's so much. I could not help thinking of the wild ritual of this work, and of its probable influence upon the hypochondriac, when one evening, having informed me abruptly that the Lady Madeline was no more, he stated his intention of preserving her corpse for a fortnight. Previously, in its final interment, in one of the numerous vaults within the main walls of the building. The worldly reason, however, assigned for this singular proceeding was one which I did not feel the liberty to dispute. The brother had been led to his resolution, so he told me, by consideration of the unusual character of the malady of the deceased, of certain obtrusion and eager inquiries of the part of her medical men. Ow. I had to pop my wrist, sorry. And of the remote and exposed situation of the burial ground of the family. I will not deny that when I called to mind the sinister countenance of the person whom I met upon the staircase on the day of my arrival at the house, I had no desire to oppose what I regarded as at best but a harmless and by no means an unnatural precaution. At the request of Usher, I personally aided him in the arguments of the temporary entombment. The body having been encoffined, we two alone bore it to its rest. The vault in which we placed it, and which had been so long unopened that our torches, half smothered in the oppressive atmosphere, gave us little opportunity for investigation, was small, damp, and entirely without means of admission for light. Lying at great depth immediately beneath that portion of the building in which was my own sleeping apartment, it had been used, apparently, in remote feudal times for the worst purposes of Don John Keep, and in later days as a place of deposit for powder and some other highly combustible substance, as a portion of its floor and the whole interior of a long archway through which we reached it were carefully sheathed with copper. The door of massive iron had been also similarly protected. Its immense weight caused an unusually sharp grating sound as it moved upon its hinges. Having deposited our mournful burden upon trestles within this region of horror, we partially turned aside the yet unscrewed lid of the coffin and looked upon the face of the tenant. A striking similitude between the brother and sister now first arrested my attention. And Usher, divining perhaps my thoughts, murmured out some words from which I learned that the deceased and himself had been twins, and that sympathies of the scarcely intelligible nature had always existed between them. Our glances, however... Hi, Sora. Our glances, however, rested not long upon the dead, for we could not regard her unawed. The disease which had thus entombed the lady in the maturity of youth had left, as usual in all maladies of a strictly cataleptical character, the mockery of a faint blush upon the bosom and the face, and the suspiciously lingering smile upon the lip which was so terrible in death. We were placed and screwed on the lid, and having secured the door of iron, made our way with toil into the scarcely less gloomy apartments of the upper portion of the house. And now, some days of bitter grief having elapsed, an observable change came over the features of the mental disorder of my friend. His ordinary manner had vanished. His ordinary occupations were neglected or forgotten. He roamed from chamber to chamber with hurried, unequal, and objectless steps. The pallor of his countenance had assumed, if possible, a more ghastly hue, but the luminousness of his eyes had utterly gone out. The once occasional huskiness of his tone was heard no more, and a tremulous quaver as if of extreme terror habitually characterized his utterance. There were times, indeed, when I thought his unceasingly agitated mind was laboring with some oppressive secret, to divulge which he struggled for the necessary courage. At times, again, I was obliged to resolve all into the mere inexplicable vagaries of madness, for I beheld him gazing upon vacancy for long hours in an attitude of the profoundest attention, as if listening to some imaginary sound. It was no wonder that his condition terrified, that it infected me. I felt creeping upon me, by slow yet certain degrees, the wild influences of his fantastic yet impressive superstitions. It was especially, upon retiring to bed late in the night of the 7th or 8th day, after placing Lady Madeline within the donjon, that I experienced the full power of such feelings. Sleep came not near my couch, while the hours waned and waned away. I struggled to reason off the nervousness which had dominion over me. I endeavored to believe that much, if not all of what I felt, was due to the bewildering influence of the gloomy furniture of the room, of the dark and tattered draperies which, tortured into motion by the breath of the rising tempest, swayed fitfully to and fro upon the walls, and rustled uneasily about the decorations of the bed. But my efforts were fruitless. Thank you, Sora. An irrepressible tremor gradually pervaded my frame, and at length there sat upon my very heavy heart an incubus of utterly causeless alarm. Shaking this off with a gasp and a struggle, I uplifted myself upon the pillows, and peering earnestly within the intense darkness of the chamber, hearkened. I know not why, except for that an instinctive spirit prompted me to certain low and indefinite sounds which came through the pauses of the storm at long intervals. I knew not whence. Overpowered by an intense sentiment of horror, unaccountable yet endurable, I threw on my clothes with haste, for I felt that I should sleep no more during the night, and endeavored to arouse myself from the pitiable condition into which I had fallen by pacing rapidly to and fro through the apartment. I had taken but a few turns in this manner when a light step on an adjoining staircase arrested my attention. I presently recognized it as that of Usher. In an instant afterwards he rapped with a gentle touch at my door, and entered bearing a lamp. His countenance was, as usual, cadaverously wan, and, moreover, there was a species of mad hilarity in his eyes, and evidently restrained hysteria in his whole demeanor. His air appalled me, but anything was preferable to the solitude which I had so long endured, and I even welcomed his presence as a relief. "And you have not seen it?" he said abruptly, after having stared about him for some moments in silence. "You have not seen it? But stay, you shall." Thus speaking, and having carefully shaded his lamp, he hurried to one of the casements, and threw it freely open to the storm. The impetuous fury of the entering gusts nearly lifted us from our feet. It was indeed a tempestuous yet sternly beautiful night, and one wildly singular in its terror and its beauty. A whirlwind had apparently collected its force in our vicinity, for there were frequent and violent alterations in the direction of the wind, and the exceeding density of the clouds, which hung so low as to press upon the turrets of the house, did not prevent our perceiving the lifelike velocity with which they flew careering from all points against each other, without passing away into the distance. I say that even their exceeding density did not prevent our perceiving this, yet we had no glimpse of the moon or stars, nor was there any flash worth of the lightning, but the undersurfaces of the huge masses of agitated vapor, as well as the terrestrial objects immediately around us, were glowing in the unnatural light of the faintly luminous and distinctly visible gaseous exhalation which hung about and shrouded the mansion. You shall not yet behold this." "Hi, Ceci," said I shudderingly to Usher as I led him with a gentle violence from the window to his seat. These appearances which bewilder you are merely electrical phenomena not uncommon, or it may be that they have their ghastly origin in the rank miasma of the tarn. Let us close this casement. The air is chilling and dangerous to your frame. Here is one of your favorite romances. I will read, and you shall listen, and so we will pass away this terrible night together. The antique volume which I had taken up was the Mad Tryst of Sir Lancelot Canning, but I had called it a favorite of Usher's more in sad jest than in earnest, for in truth there was little in its uncouth and unimaginative prolixity which could have had interest for the lofty and spiritual ideality of my friend. It was, however, the only book immediately at hand. I indulged a vague hope from the excitement which now agitated the hypochondriac might find relief, for the history of the mental disorder is full of similar anomalies, even in the extremeness of the folly which I should read. Could I have judged, indeed, by the wild, overstrained air of vivacity with which he hearkened, or apparently hearkened, to the words of the tale, I might well have congratulated myself upon the success of my design. I have arrived at that well-known portion of the story where Ethelred, the hero of the tryst, having sought in vain for peaceable admission of the dwelling of the hermit, proceeds to make good an entrance by force. Here it will be remembered, the words of the narrative run thus. And Ethelred, who was by nature of a doughty heart, and who was now mighty withal, on account of the powerfulness of the wine which he had drunken, waited no longer to hold parley with the hermit, who in sooth was of an obstinate and maliceful turn, but feeling the rain upon his shoulders, and fearing the rising of the tempest, uplifted his mace outright, and with blows made quickly room in the plankings of the door with his gauntleted hand. And now pulling therewith sturdily, he so cracked and ripped and tore all asunder, that the noise of the dry and hollow-sounding wood alarummed and reverberated throughout the forest. At the termination of the sentence I started, and for a moment paused, and for it appeared to me, although I at once concluded that my excited fancy had derived me, it appeared to me that, for some very remote portion of the mansion, there came indistinctively to my ears what might have been, in its exact similarity of character, the echo, but a stifled and dull one certainly, of the very cracking and ripping sound which Sir Lancelot had so particularly described. It was, beyond doubt, the coincidence alone which had arrested my attention, for amid the rattling of the sachets and the castaments, and the ordinary commingled noises of the still increasing storm, the sound in itself had nothing, surely, which should have interrupted or disturbed me. I continued the story. But the good champion Ethelred, now entering within the door, was sore enraged and amazed to perceive no single of the maliceful hermit, and in the stead thereof a dragon of a scaly and prodigious demeanor, and of a fiery tongue, which Satan guard before a palace of gold, with a floor of silver, and upon a wall there hung a shield of shining brass, with this legend enwritten: Who entereth herein a conqueror hath been, who slayeth the dragon, the shield he shall win. And Ethelred uplifted his mace and struck it upon the head of the dragon, which fell before him, and he gave up his pesty breath with a shriek so horrid and harsh, and withal so piercing, that Ethelred had fain so closed his ears with his hands against the dreadful noise of it, the like whereof was never before heard. Here again I pause abruptly, and now with a feeling of wild amazement, for there could be no doubt whatever that, in this instance, I did actually hear, although from what direction it proceeded I found it impossible to say, a low and apparently distant, but harsh, protracted, and most unusual screaming or grating sound, the exact counterpart of what my fancy had already conjured up for the dragon's unnatural shriek as described by the romancer. Oppressed, as I certainly was, upon the occurrence of the second and most extraordinary coincidence, by 1,000 conflicting sensations in which wonder and extreme terror were predominant, I still retained sufficient presence of mind to avoid exciting by any observation the sensitive nervousness of my companion. I was by no means certain that he had noticed the sounds in question, although assuredly a strange alteration had, during the last few minutes, taken place in his demeanor. From a position fronting my own, he had gradually brought round his chair, so as to sit with his face to the door of the chamber, and thus I could but partially perceive his features, although I saw that his lips were trembling, as if he was murmuring inaudibly. His head had dropped upon his breast, yet I know that he was not asleep, for the wild and rigid opening of the eye as I caught a glimpse of it in profile. The motion of his body, too, was at variance with this idea, for he rocked from side to side with a gentle yet constant and uniform sway. Having taken notice of all of this, I assumed the narrative of Sir Lancelot, which thus proceeded. And now the champion, having escaped from the terrible fury of the dragon, bethinking himself of the brazen shield and of the breaking up of the enchantment which was upon it, removed the carcass out of the way before him, and approached valorously over the silver pavement. Hi, Avalt! How are you? I'm about to finish reading the Fall of the House of Usher, where the shield was upon the wall, which in sooth tarried not for his full coming, but fell down at his feet upon the silver flooring with a mighty great and terrible ringing sound. No sooner had these syllables passed my lips than, as if a shield of brass had indeed at that moment fallen heavily upon a floor of silver, I became aware of a distinct, hollow, metallic, and clangorous, yet apparently muffled reverberation. Completely unnerved, I leaped to my feet, but the measured, rocking movement of Usher had undisturbed. I rushed to the chair in which he sat. His eyes were bent fixedly before him, and throughout his whole countenance there reigned a stony rigidity. But as I placed my hand upon his shoulder, there came a strong shudder over his whole person. A sickly smile quivered about his lips, and I saw that he spoke in a low, hurried, and gibbering manner, as if unconscious of my presence. Bending closely over him, I at length drank in the hideous import of his words. I'm good, just reading. Not hear it? Yes, I hear it, and have heard it. Long, long, long. Many minutes, many hours, many days have I heard it, yet I dared not. Oh, pity me, miserable wretch that I am. I dared not speak. We have put her living in the tomb. Said I not that my senses were acute, I now tell you that I heard her first feeble movements in the hollow coffin. I heard them many, many days ago, yet I dared not speak. And now, tonight, Ethelred, ha! The breaking of the hermit's door, and the death cry of the dragon, and the clangor of the shield, say rather the rending of her coffin, and the grating of the iron hinges of her prison, and her struggling within the coppered archway of the vault. Oh, whither shall I fly? Will she not be here anon? Is she not hurrying to unbraid me from my haste? Have I not heard her footstep on the stair? Do I not distinguish that heavy and horrible beating of her heart? Madman! Here he sprang furiously to his feet, and shrieked out his syllables, as if in the effort he were giving up his soul. Madman! I tell you she now stands within the door. As if in the superhuman energy of his utterance there had been found the potency of a spell. The huge antique panels to which the speaker pointed threw slowly back, upon the instant, their ponderous and ebony jaws. It was the work of the rushing gust. And then without those doors, there did stand the lofty and enshrouded figure of the Lady Madeline of Usher. There was blood upon her white robes, and the evidence of some bitter struggle upon every portion of her emaciated frame. For a moment she remained trembling and reeling to and fro upon the threshold, and then, with a low moaning cry, fell heavily inward upon the person of her brother, and in her violent and now final death agonies bore him to the floor, a corpse, and a victim to the terrors he had anticipated. From that chamber and from that mansion I fled aghast. The storm was still abroad in all its wrath as I found myself crossing the old causeway. Suddenly there shot along the path a wild light, and I turned to see whence a gleam so unusual could have issued, for the vast house and the shadows were alone behind me. The radiance was that of a full setting and blood-red moon, which now shone vividly through the only barely discernible fissure, of which I have before spoken as extending from the roof of the building in zigzag direction to the base. While I gazed, this fissure rapidly widened. There came a fierce breath of the whirlwind. The entire orb of the satellite burst at once upon my sight. My brain reeled as I saw the mighty walls rushing asunder. There was a long, tumultuous shouting sound like the voice of 1,000 waters, and the deep and dank tarn at my feet closed suddenly and silently over the fragments of the house of Usher. I read like 6 stories and my throat really hurts. Hi. Is anyone still awake? Or did I like actually put some of you guys to sleep? But no, to answer your question, Evolds, I am okay. I was really nervous for today because I was worried that it was gonna be bad and that none of you guys would like it. But it's been so long since I've read Poe that I was actually really happy that I got to sit down and read some to you guys. Even if it was my way of kind of bypassing ASMR because I don't know how to do ASMR. I'm not like the quietest person, so talking this low has kind of really strained my voice. But I still have water, so I'm okay. No, the raven's wing is peeling. I know I put one person to sleep. I think. Hi, Chai. How's Bob Ross night? Are y'all having fun? Welcome, Raphael! Welcome to the aviary. You finished your painting? I want to see. Did y'all share in the server? Hi, welcome. Most are playing code names. That's okay. We just finished reading some Edgar Allan Poe. Now I'm just sitting here kind of waiting to get my voice back. I know I saw Grea's. Greya put his in his Discord under like night art. Ugh, I really wish I could have been there. I would have loved to paint with you guys. I'll have to catch up. How was it, Chai? How was it? Scale of 1 to 10. Tell me how much you hated it. I just scratched my back. It felt so good. Oh my god. Yeah, I owe Rose positive affirmations, but she never came back, so I think she's still at work. I was reading Edgar Allan Poe. I just read through some of his stories. I read The Raven. I finished it off with The Fall of the House of Usher, which is one of my personal favorites. To the process of a Bob Ross is painful. I've actually done a Bob Ross painting party before. I did it for my 19th birthday, I think. And it was with oil paints on like, it was like just like cardboard or like the cheap thin canvas boards you can find. And I think I ended up giving my painting to a friend, but someone kept asking me, they were like, how are you making it look like it's watercolor? And I was like, I blended it. Like, I don't know what I did, but I blended it. But now I have to paint Greya. I still need to sketch out that painting. I'll do it probably on Monday, maybe? Because I've kind of been... I think insomnia has been getting to me. I've been very bad at sleeping a lot recently, and I don't exactly like that fact because I don't want to sleep a lot. I want to be able to do stuff and to like stream and experience things with friends, you know? But I do need to. What, the Edgar Allan Poe? No, it's an old collection of all of his stories. It's like the only thing new about it is it has new art. But no, Chai, I need I need to draw Greya and Selene or Celine, the moon spirit, the moon titaness on that canvas before my cat like scratches a hole in it, because I caught her using it as a scratching post today, and I was like, can you not? Please, I need that. I need that to give to a friend so he can't pay me. And he's not even here. He's not even here anymore. So he can't dispute. But what was I saying? I wanna draw with you guys. I need to charge my iPad, so maybe I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow I have the stream with Mafu, and I'm so excited because I've wanted to extend an invitation to collab with what, not even, I guess is Goose Goose Duck a collaboration? If it's like a lot, well, I guess it's a collab. I've wanted to extend the offer to collab with a few of my friends. I've just been like super scared because like I don't want to message Greya and bother him. I don't want to message Mafu and bother her, and I don't want to message Rose or Emmy or Hebby or Bale or any of them and be like, you want to be a duck? Because I don't know, just without just I feel like out of the blue is very mean, you know? But I kind of want to set up another community night where me and a bunch of friends and chat get together and we play Goose Goose Duck, and we like just play all kinds of fun games. And maybe someday I'll get Jackbox, because I've never played that. I have no idea what that's supposed to do. I have 2 pet cats, yes. One is named Damocles, like the sword, and the other one is named Bam Bam. And she's the one who's been using my canvas as a scratching post, and she's not allowed to do that. But Chai, you really don't have to. It's kind of why whenever I did it the first time and I was like, oh, I'm having a community night, and I posted my Discord in your server, that was like the one and only time that I did it, because I didn't want to bother anybody. I didn't want to like message anybody and be like, hello, I'm gonna continue to waste your time because I want to play games with you. And I don't know, it just seems kind of mean to me, and maybe that's just like my anxiety, but I don't know. It's in the works. I'm kind of planning it. It might be, let me look at the calendar. Maybe I'll do it next weekend. I don't know. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. But if anything, I will, if not whenever Rose does it and we do the Bob Ross night, I will make up that Bob Ross painting night and post my picture in the Discord so we can see all of the arts. But no, it is actually midnight, and talking this low has hurt my throat, my jaw, and now my head. So I'm going to go ahead and end stream and rest up. Chai, if y'all are still in there, I might join BC in my headphones and just vibe with you guys. But let me see if I can raid out, or if there's anybody to raid out. Let me see if there's a point. Oh no! Marcy. Hi everyone. Welcome Raiders. Welcome, welcome. To anyone who's new here, welcome. My name is Nightingale. I'm your local reincarnated fairy princess, here to cause mayhem, panic, and all the good stuffs. Marcy, why did you do this? I just saw you were live. I was about to raid you. I was about to raid you, Marcy. But we just went ahead, did our first ever Edgar Allan Poe ASMR stream, and my throat hurts kind of a lot. So unfortunately, you guys get to come with us to the raid. There's a chance we'll raid out. See if I can manage this. Let me see. But how's it been, everyone? I hope stream was good. What did you play? What did you play? Alright, let us see. Oh my god, my head really does hurt. Alright, I'm gonna raid into... Y'all played Persona? I want to play Persona someday. I've never really gotten into it. All I know is Joker, you know, like the most popular one because everybody draws art of him. But I wanna know what all the hype's about, you know? I want to... Alright, let's see if I can qualify for this raid. And stream broke. Okay. This is a friend of mine who's also doing ASMR. So let's go show her. Let me do this. How do I do this again? And it doesn't get up, whatever. Hold on. Let's go ahead and raid out to her. She's super duper sweet. She is a shape-shifting VTuber who is an ASMR artist and is actually super adorable. So please wish her all the best, give her all the love. She is someone that I personally look up to because she was one of the quote-unquote bigger people who kind of came to me to be my friend, and they've always been there. So let's go and just spread the love to them, give them a great night, all the stuff. Maybe you'll like their ASMR. I don't know. But thank you guys so much for being here and for being so supportive. It really means a lot. But I hope you have a good day, a good night, and a good life. Mwah. Bye.